Welcome to the Wild Physio podcast with your host, Andrew Wild. Today, I have Daniel Arbilla back. And just for the listeners that haven't listened to his first episode, Daniel is an accredited exercise physiologist and mentor to health and fitness professionals around the world looking to upskill in communication skills and chronic pain. Daniel is passionate about guiding and coaching health and fitness professionals through challenging cases and to assist them in implementing evidence-based care and psychologically informed practice. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks again for having me, mate. Pleasure.
My pleasure, mate. I am really looking forward to this. And the reason why I really wanted to get you on today is I wanted to talk about whether we should be flexing our spine with certain things, also to cover some new grad stuff. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the flexing and the spine stuff was because I saw you post on Instagram the other day, all these different crazy sort of deadlifting techniques that you were doing with different grips and different positionings and with you were on more of a 45-degree angle and all this sort of stuff. Now, pretty open-ended question to start with. What is your take on the flexion argument? Should we flex our back? Should we not? Is flexion something that we need to worry about with day-to-day things, or is it mainly something that we should be worrying about keeping more of a neutral zone when we just lift weights? What are your thoughts? And let's just have a bit of a chat about it.
Absolutely. So the principles that I go off would be dynamic systems theory. So the idea is that it depends on the task, first and foremost. So if we're talking an atlas zone, what would be the most efficient way to lift up a rounded object? You'd ideally want some flexion in the spine. When it comes to a 1RM stiff-legged deadlift or a Romanian deadlift, even better, Romanian deadlift, you want to transfer most of the load to the posterior chain, the hamstrings, especially if we're using that specifically for rehab or athlete development. You'd want more of a neutral spine or even an extended spine. So it depends on the task, first and foremost. Then the next couple would be the person, the athlete. What are their lever arms? What are their movement preferences? What's their training history with the movement? So I posted an infamous video that you referred to. My 1RM is 200 kilos with straps, so it doesn't really count apparently. So about 180 without straps for a deadlift, like a conventional deadlift.
Yep.
So that's why I was able to do a 100 kilo deadlift in various funky ways. If I was coaching a newbie, we wouldn't go straight away to 100 kilos. The point of that video was to show that I didn't die, first and foremost, and there's more than one way to lift an object up, depending on the task. So the three were the task, the athlete, and the context, so the environment. If this is a sporting field, you're going to have to adapt into all the different kind of positions for your spine because you're going to get into them anyway, regardless of whether you want to or not. If we look at performance, people use the spine, especially when there's time, to prepare for a jump, for a throw. You look at all the twisting involved, the rotational aspects. You look at tackles, you look at wrestling. You're going to be exposed into these positions. So with that in mind, how about we prepare for them in certain tasks with our strength and conditioning? Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's very much context dependent, and it depends with most things in health, it depends and it needs to be individualized. But I think the biggest thing is a lot of people think that you can keep a neutral spine no matter what you're doing. Like say, for instance, you're doing a squat or a deadlift and you can keep a neutral spine, but you can't. And that's been shown with the research. Neutral spine is a zone. It's not a specific position. And some of the research by Potvin and McGill has shown that there's up to 40 degrees of lumbar flexion. So when we say flexion, what we mean is forward bending of the lumbar spine with a squat, 40 degrees, 26 degrees with a kettlebell swing, and up to 25 degrees with a good morning. And there's another study by King Ma, and they showed that a squat's roughly 45 to 52 degrees of flexion. So I think that's really important for people to understand. No matter if you're trying to maintain a quote unquote neutral spine or not, you're still going to get flexion, aren't you?
Yeah, that's it. It's unavoidable. It's normal as well. It's part of natural movement. And there's no real research that shows that it specifically is an independent risk factor for pain. So there's research showing that maybe load is more of a factor. So overall load management, training history, these things versus specifically flexion. I think the idea was from research by McGill, looking at repetitive flexion in pig spines. So this is a dead pig spine model. The biggest kind of question I have is, or the caveat is, we're not dead first and foremost. So we're living tissues and we can adapt over time. And I think they use something crazy in that research. I'd have to read into it again, but it's like thousands of repetitions in a very short amount of time. So of course, some structure is going to break, and it's going to break according to how much flexion, how much, even if it's in neutral, you're still going to break after a repetitive amount of strain. So it's less so the position, it would be more so the person's preparation and training history and overall load than specifically spinal flexion.
Yeah, and I agree with the fact that that study was done with dead pigs. Yes, I agree. And according to what I found is the study you're mentioning, it was 86,400 bending cycles at a rate of 1 hertz with simultaneous torques, rotations, blah. So yeah, I agree. Like there was a lot of that repetitive movement over and over again. And you don't have the dynamic structures with a dead pig to try and stabilize, because that's what we have when we're living, don't we? We have dynamic restraints and we have static restraints. Just go into that a little bit for the listeners, the dynamic restraints versus the static, and why it's so important that we have the dynamic restraints.
Absolutely. So I think the thing on this topic is that when people picture that spinal flexion, we tend to picture a spinal model without any muscle attached. So you get like the classic vertebral model with the red discs and like the bulging stuff and the jelly donut analogy. And it's like, hang on, it's more than just that. First of all, the vertebral structure is strong as fuck. Secondly, we've got all these ligaments, all these tendons, the muscle attachments. There's a body around that can be a bit more active and dynamic and absorb some of that force vertebra connection. There's a lot more involved. And then I'll dive into the fact that we can adapt. Again, we're not a spinal model. We're humans, and we can adapt over time. We can get stronger. And when we get stronger, it's not just our muscles that get stronger. Everything gets stronger.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, the disc can adapt as well. And this is coming from someone that's had a lot of back issues myself over the years. You know, I had stress fractures in my back in my late teens from football and cricket. So 16, 17, 18, I had a lot of issues. And over the last sort of 3 years, I've had, on and off niggle through my back. I know I have a disc bulge at L5S1, but I know that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to have pain. This is the other thing that I wanted to discuss is a lot of people think that just because they have a disc bulge or disc degeneration that they're going to have pain. The damage often within a spine or whatever joint it is in the body does not often correlate to pain, and it does not often correlate to disability. Why is it so important for people to understand that things found on a scan that are quote unquote a pathology, they are not necessarily a bad thing?
Absolutely, because imagine having that understanding that your pain is caused specifically by a structure. Like, how limiting would that belief be? How would you act in the world if you knew that you had a disc bulge? I would protect the shit out of my back. I wouldn't want to flex at all. So it makes total sense that people can get led into that cycle of fear avoidance, that persisting pain cycle that's so common to see. When there is evidence, they have credible evidence that it's dangerous to flex their spine. So we're influenced by our explanations, our beliefs, our understanding, our sense making of the experience of pain. So it can be quite damaging if we have that idea that, hey, your pain is because of this disc bulge, when the research shows that there's just as many people have disc bulges and they don't have symptoms. So maybe there's a bit more to it. I think a caveat to that, just because it comes to mind, is we're not denying tissue involvement.
Yes.
We're not denying that there is no tissue sensitivity at all involved. And we're just like, lift however you want and don't really matter. Like, load management doesn't matter. Technique never matters. I think that swings a little bit too much to the other side of the extreme of the pendulum. So we're instead considering and acknowledging that there might be some tissue changes, but you're not doomed. You can still flex your spine and you can adapt because you're human.
Yeah, agree. I really agree. And I often like to put it like this, like repeated flexion without too much load, like tying your shoelaces or bending over to pick something that's reasonably light off the ground, is fine. Like, I have zero problem with that. And low load repetitive flexion is fine as well. Look at a rower. A rower will do repetitive flexion over and over and over and over and over again. And a golfer, I looked into the golf stuff as well because I play a fair bit of golf myself, and up to 48% of max flexions repeated over and over and over again with a golf swing. And it's really important to understand that all that stuff is okay it's okay to flex your spine, but I think that biomechanics do matter when we're getting to stuff that's heavier. I think they do. The heavier load training, I think trying to maintain a reasonably neutral zone is not the worst idea considering what we know with the research. Do you think that that is a wise recommendation for most people?
Absolutely. And that's when we can talk about performance, and we kind of, I'd say we take the experience of pain a little bit less in that equation. We're looking at what's the most efficient way to do this task. And there's going to be more efficient ways to pick up a heavy object and move it from point A to point B. You want to move it in a straight line. You want to use the maximum amount of levers and use your bigger muscle groups to your advantage. Use everything you can to lift it. You're not going to just use your back, just like you're not going to just use your hips. You're going to use bloody everything to lift it. So there's going to be more efficient ways when it comes to high-end performance of tasks. Absolutely. And that's important because, again, people discount the importance of technique. And on that, it doesn't mean that we can't coach someone to perform better. So if someone is lifting in a way that is good for them, they've adapted to it, who says that they can't adapt to a new way? Who says that they might be able to experiment with different positions and maybe more extension, maybe more flexion, depending on their lever arms? So for some athletes, they've been told to keep in a bit of extension, and they might not realize that they're going into that spinal extension in a deadlift. Then you cue them, hey, what happens if you crunch a bit more? That shortens the lever arm, and based on their anthropometrics, they perform better. Maybe they need to work on the lockout because they need to move a bit more at the top of the movement in a conventional deadlift, but you just shorten the lever arm, you've shortened the moment rather, and they can lift it more efficiently. So again, technique absolutely 100% matters when it comes to performance. When it comes to pain, we don't have that. We can't say, hey, you are in pain because you lifted that wrong.
Great point. I really like that as a point. And Greg Lehman has this great article online about spinal flexion. And in that, he did mention that sports which are more flexion based do not have more back pain than sports that are more quote unquote neutral. So something like a golf that has high amounts of flexion, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to definitely have pain. One thing about that though, because I have played a lot more golf in the last 2 to 3 years, and because I am doing something that is a little bit more repetitive in terms of the flexion stuff, I've noticed that my body can't cope with as much deadlifting as I did do previously for the few years before that, because I think that repetitive flexion that I'm doing over and over again with golf, the amount of load going through my lumbar spine and my back muscles is getting to the point where I'm so strong through that area, I don't really need to add more and more and more and more load and more strength to that area all the time. So I've had to modify things, and this is based around me. And I have a very long lever arm when it comes to my torso. I've got a really long torso, so I've had to be mindful of that, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. So I agree with everything you've said. I think too many people are black and white with this stuff. It's like flexion's really important, and you should be flexing your spine under really heavy loads. But then there's other people that are like, no, you need to stay in that neutral position. And you're like, well, neutral's just a zone anyway. Like it's always going to happen. I think we just need to be a little bit more in that gray area. And I really like what you're saying there. And I really like what you're preaching online as well. So props to you for that. Do you have anything else to add in regards to the whole flexing spine and flexion during any movement argument?
It seems that the summary is, if you do flex it, you're not going to die. You can try it. And there's more than one way to lift. And at the same time, everyone has their most efficient way of lifting. So we can, and that's important that I said, and I didn't say, but I didn't discount what I just said. So we can have all these kind of narratives at the same time. There's too many camps that, it's either, like you said, black or white. It's either flexion is good, let's do it all the time, or never flex. It's like, hang on, there's a bit of gray involved. Depends on the context, depends on the load, depends on overall load management. Like for yourself with golf, like for myself, back when I was playing soccer, I wouldn't squat 5 days a week heavy. I'd be fucking tanked. I wouldn't have the ability to perform when I had the games on. So all these things, there's a bigger picture to take into consideration, and we can have both narratives depending on the context.
Yeah, completely agree. Well said. One thing as well to note, discs can herniate even when you're in quote unquote neutral. A lot of people think that they're only going to herniate with flexion. And the other thing about it is disc herniations, if someone has a disc herniation, does not mean that they're going to have pain. And some of the research suggests that disc herniations in low back pain, the prevalence of it is only 2 to 5%. So you see so many people that have back pain that have absolutely zero issues on MRI if they do go and have an MRI. And there's so many other factors that are at play here. And this is the segue into pain education that we're going to go into now. There's so many things that are contributing to someone's pain. And let's go through a few of those. So there are things like sleep or a lack of sleep, stress. Let's dive into a few of the others for us, Daniel. And also while you're there, let's just discuss how you go about teaching someone about what pain actually is.
Absolutely. So when we talk about pain, we see it now as an experience, and it's subjective as well. So I think the first and foremost, when someone comes in with a scan, they're showing it to you, they're like, I have a disc bulge, fix me. If we were to go, nah, bro, like that doesn't matter, we push the scan away and we like ignore it, what message does that send? I think that's important to, number one, validate. Number one, say, I hear you, let's look through the report. Whether you look through it in detail or not is up to you, but at least listen to them, listen to their story, and know that their experience is real. So if we were to look at the principles of pain science, is always it's real and always it's subjective according to what the person says and what they think. There are a huge bunch of factors. So it's multifactorial. As you mentioned, sleep, stress, their understanding of it, their previous experiences. If we look at the predictive processing models of brain and perception, if you've had experience of every single time you bend down, you get pain, no shit, your brain is going to adapt and get better at sending out that signal to protect you because you want to survive in this environment. So all these factors are involved. It's more than just a spine. It's the person, their perception, their experiences of it in the past. The other principle is that just like we can adapt with our muscles and our strength, we can also adapt with our neurological system. We can also adapt with our pain responses, our behavioral responses. So you get the, shit, no, my back, fuck. And I avoid it every single time. We can change that. How about instead we do something different? How about we lift it in a different way? How about we look at reframing the entire experience? How about we look at maybe lifting a little bit less this time, so you know that you can experience, I'm actually okay. So you get less of that intense behavioral protective response that can be quite subconscious. There's that heavy muscle guarding that you often see. So in essence, we can look at pain as an influence of many different factors, and making sure that we're validating that person and listening to their story first before providing that education.
It's important to listen to someone's story. Yeah, I completely agree with that, because the thing is, everyone's pain is going to be different. Everyone's going to cope with pain a little bit differently. And you often find this as well with, someone that's never had an injury, say for instance, and they get to 35 and finally they have a big injury, and their idea of pain previously was they were in this mode of, I've never had pain ever, really. Like, I burnt my finger here and there. I've never had an injury. They're in this eliminating mindset. And that is an eliminating mindset that's often been, it's been influenced by society, because a lot of people think that they should just eliminate pain all the time. But the reality is, with pain's there for a reason often. And it's so we survive. Imagine if we didn't get pain, you'd grab the iron or the kettle or something and it's really hot and you'd burn yourself all the time and you'd get all these catastrophic injuries. So pain is there for a reason, and it's often influenced by the body's perceived threat. It's thinking certain things are a threat to your survival, and it's just trying to help you survive. So if you have a client, Daniel, that comes in and they've got these negative mindsets and negative beliefs about pain, that they should eliminate pain all the time and pain is bad, and they've grown up in a family where it's like, no, you can't have pain, we need to get rid of it. How do you go about changing someone's mindset?
Yeah, so I think the first question, because I used to dive into trying to immediately challenge their beliefs, and sometimes people aren't so bought in. Maybe I haven't built enough of that rapport initially and that validation that we talked about at the start. So rather than rushing in to tell them how wrong they are, maybe making space for that belief, acknowledging it, validating, I hear you, I understand, showing that you understand with reflective listening and communication skills. And then, hey, based on your goals of wanting to get back onto the sporting field, of wanting to function a bit better, what would you be doing if pain wasn't an issue? Let's target that. Let's focus on some experiential learning. Let's focus on doing things differently. And then we can give that education after they have that experience. So rather than giving them a pain science lecture, and regrettably in the past, I used to just link people, YouTube videos, Lorimer Mosley's videos, and they'd be like, the fuck's this? Like, have you not listened to me? I've got a disc bulge. So they weren't ready for the information. Making sure that they have some experiences first and foremost to draw upon, and then providing that education to fill in the gaps, to maybe give some other suggestions that communicate that pain is not something to be panicking about. It's protective, it's normal, and you can still function with some level of pain as long as it's tolerable to you. That's all that matters. And that's up to the individual.
And when you say tolerable, what do you mean? And is that something that you use out of a marker out of 10? I often use, a 3 to 4 out of 10, and below is okay. But if it's kind of spiking above that, maybe we shouldn't do it. That's all dependent on what the person's, or how well the person can figure out where they are out of 10. And that's based on what their previous pain experience has been like. So, a mother that's had 4 children and they've all been natural birthings, well, of course she's going to know what real pain is, as opposed to someone that's just had a paper cut and they've gotten to 25 and never been injured. So what do you sort of tell your clients in terms of what's tolerable and not?
Yes, I care more about what they are ready for and what they're willing to do. there's no point in giving someone a specific number if they don't even understand, they don't have a context, they don't even have experiences of what that number means. So I care about, hey, right now, would you be willing to try this based on your experiences in the past? And you can stop at any time. You're in control. So I want to give them a sense that they're empowered to make a decision, because if I drop dead, I want them to know what exactly they can do, what tools they can do without me needing to be there and telling them exactly how to drop the loads or how to modify a movement or how to change something. So it's up to what they're ready for, what they're willing to do. And another good indication is, how do they feel 24 to 48 hours after? So if they can't walk for 3 days and they can't perform their functional activities and their day-to-day tasks, hey, that's okay. We're going to use that data. You just did a bit too much too soon. So my reaction is not, oh shit, stop everything. Don't do that. Why'd you do that? You idiot. We're not going to be like that. We're going to be like, hey, oh, okay. You did a bit too much too soon. That's cool. What we'll do is we'll modify a few things next time so that you can still function a few days after. And now we've got some reference points to draw upon next time.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, asking the client to figure out what's tolerable during the exercise or activity, after the exercise, whether that be that night and that afternoon, and then the next day. What is it? Is it spiking at all during those? Because like a tendon, say, for instance, might be angry the next morning. So you've got to ask the client, what does it feel like during, after, next day? I really like that. And I also like a good analogy that I sometimes use, and actually food for thought as well. The whole sending like the Lorimer Moseley YouTube videos, I agree that you shouldn't send them early because I think it often confuses the client, but I do send them to clients once they've got a decent understanding of, okay, what have I already taught them? What have they learned? Do they have a clear understanding of what I'm saying? And are they going to understand this YouTube that I'm going to send about Lorimer Moseley's pain science stuff? So yeah, I agree with that. But the whole notion of dosage is a really good one. Like often people would go and have, if they had 10 Panadol or 8 Panadol, they'd get an upset stomach and they go to the doctor and the doctor's like, mate, you've just had too many, have the prescribed dose. It's much like that with a lot of injuries. And it's a good analogy for people to understand. Sometimes you've just done too much too soon. And I've seen that so much in COVID isolation, people running too much too soon. Or they haven't done enough for a long period of time and they're really deconditioned and they can exceed their tolerance really easily. So I think analogies are really, really great. And do you use any specific analogies with pain science and when you're educating your clients about pain?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's an analogy that you can draw upon from their own experience, for instance, and just something relatable. So if you were to right now run a marathon, if I said you had to run a marathon tomorrow, what would happen the day after? You'd probably pull up a bit sore, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. So you just did a bit too much too soon. But if I said you're going to run a marathon in 6 months, what would you be doing?
Training.
I'd be gradually, fuck yeah, it'd be training. And another great one is if someone has had an acute kind of flare up of some sort, and they tend to they've avoided the area for months and months and months. Hey, have you ever had an ankle sprain before? Yeah, I've had an ankle sprain. Cool. So what happened like the first couple of weeks? Oh yeah, I was like limping around, hobbling around. Maybe I taped it. Okay, cool. And did you bed rest for 6 months? No. Okay. So actually the limping, like gradually you got, less limping and you were loading it and you were progressively increasing your range of motion. And that's what facilitates healing. In a similar way to X body part, to call it a shoulder, call it a back, we need to gradually build into that. So you're limping and you're not just bed resting like an ankle sprain.
Yeah. Calm shit down and then build shit back up. It's really important for people to understand that. Just little tweaks make the world a difference. And it frustrates me that I see a lot of people in, my profession, your profession, over diagnosing, things and also over prescribing exercises when often person with the running, say, for instance, it's a good example. They've just done a little bit too much too soon. Do they need to do 5 different glute medius activation exercises prior to running to help? No no amount of corrective exercises can often fix a volume problem. If people are just doing too much too soon, well, your corrective exercises are going to do absolutely nothing, pretty much.
That's it. Maybe they're just distracting them as natural healing takes place.
Exactly. And that's something that people should understand, is there's a natural history with most injuries. Most injuries are going to get better in time, no matter what. And they're going to get better if you don't see a physio or an exercise physiologist. And often the physio and the exercise physiologist is only trying to help you get over that injury a little bit quicker. And a lot of that is, the pain science and the pain education, having a chat to someone, getting it off their chest, also knowing exactly what to do and having a plan. But remember that there is a natural history with most injuries. So, often physios think they've got special magic hands, but at the end of the day, there's still often just a natural history and it's going to get better in time. Let's segue into this, mate. New grad recommendations. So it's the end of the year 2020. It's been a weird year, but if you're a physio grad or an exercise physiology grad, what type of recommendations would you give these kids coming out of uni in the next 12 months? What courses should they look at doing? What should they be doing other than signing up for the Knowledge Exchange? Bit of a shameless plug for you. What do you recommend?
So the biggest thing that I get as a mentor is people don't feel confident or competent going straight from uni into, say, private practice. I think if for any new grad listening, if right now you don't feel really confident or up for it, that's a good thing, because it shows that you care. And the thing that we tend to forget is everyone was on that boat. We just practiced, we made mistakes. We got comfortable with dealing with some of that uncertainty that is inherent in clinical practice. We're dealing with humans when we're not dealing with peak spine models. We're not dealing with body parts. There's people attached to those body parts. There's all these different factors involved, all these different contexts that a lot of things are outside of our control. So having more experience under our belt and having that supportive environment around you, that can really, really help in those initial steps as you enter private practice. So specifically, I deal with people in private practice. So I think the first and foremost, surrounding yourself with people who both support and challenge you. That can include mentors, that can include other coaches. So if you're lacking in S&C prescription, go to a strength and conditioning coach, get some first-hand experience yourself, and be willing to be a bit vulnerable yourself and go through that process as a client. I think that's one of the biggest learning experiences if you've had that first-hand experience yourself. Then don't be afraid to ask certain questions that you might think are stupid or dumb. There's no such thing as a dumb question. And if you have that support network, you can bounce ideas off other people, and you might realize that other people were thinking the exact same thing. So having that support crew around you and getting some mentoring, getting a coach, and practicing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because we're all going to make mistakes. And we only see the highlights on Instagram. We don't see the fuck ups. So that's an important consideration, because there's going to be times we're going to fuck up. And the most learning happens from the mistakes, not so much from the wins. I think it's important to reflect on both. It's more so the biggest learning blocks for myself personally was when I stuffed up, because then I could reflect and say, okay, what could I have done better next time?
Yeah. I think the best clinicians learn from their mistakes really quickly, and they implement strategies so they don't make those mistakes again, and they learn quickly. I think that's the secret. And you're going to stuff up. Like, we all stuff up. We're all human. That's just part and parcel of your career. The first few years are always going to be tricky, but the mistakes definitely help you. Are there any courses that you would recommend for a first year grad? Any specific things you would do? Because I know that I would send off any first year grad in physio world to go and do a strength and conditioning course or something of the like, to learn more about strength and conditioning, because it's very poorly taught. at university for all physio grads. They're just not going to be competent enough with strength conditioning. Are there any other courses that you would recommend people do?
Absolutely. You have to do ergonomics, postural analysis, fascia, foam roller, trigger. No, I'm just joking. But
don't do any of that.
This is important. Don't do that. But this is important because this is what was on the ESSA website. So there's courses out there that still talk about these things. Hence the importance of courses where you have the sources of information first and foremost. So they're actually going off, they're evidence-based, and the ability to question the presenters. So that's one of the things that I like about the knowledge exchange that, shout out, I'm a part of, is we allow that question time, and we encourage that as well, because it's important to ask, because we're not gurus and we need to be flexible ourselves as instructors and course facilitators to adapt according to the evidence. So having those courses that promote critical thinking, have evidence base and sources, and perhaps look at more of a bird's eye view of conditions rather than sticking to set formulas. So I think it's good to have certain frameworks at the start. So I can think of a few that have, based on this diagnosis, you give these exercises and this is the progression scheme. That's good to start off with. I think the next level above that is, after you have some more experience, is what are the courses that look at things from the big picture? Greg Lehman comes to mind, the calm shit down, build shit up.
Yes.
He's got some online courses now and he's going to do the in-person ones. So I'd highly recommend that. There's a few others. So Adam Meekins, Ben Cormack, Jared Powell, the shoulder physio.
Yeah.
And I would also echo strength and conditioning. So if you can look at, there's clinical athlete and barbell medicine. Those would be my top two recommendations, where they talk about the adaptability of humans, and they look at dynamic systems theory when it comes to coaching, and they actually go through coaching, because that's one of the things that's missing. How to actually coach a movement to a newbie that's never done a squat before. How can you facilitate that learning with them? So those are the top ones that come to mind, making sure with all of them that you can question the sources and you have that time and that you're encouraged to be critical.
Yeah, great recommendations. I think that's going to be some really, really important information for a lot of the new grads out there. I agree. And I think that it's really important for everyone to question things. You need to continue to question things. And just because I say it or you say it or anyone says it doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be right. So you've got to question things and listen to the right people. The other thing that I would say for new grads, there are a lot of free things out there. Podcasts are a really good way of learning. Your podcast, my podcast, there's so many other great podcasts out there. Meekins has a podcast. Lehman's been interviewed on several podcasts himself as well. I think him and Meekins have done a few over the years as well. So, there's so many free things out there as well. Don't think that just because a course is $800 or $1,000, just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's good. So you've got to look outside the box a little bit. There's plenty of options, and that's still really, really good development for you as a clinician going forward, listening to podcasts regularly. My old podcast, the Hybrid Therapist podcast, was a great one as well. And your podcast is the Knowledge Exchange podcast. So is that correct? Yep. And for the listeners out there, it's great. Have a listen to that. Daniel has, shameless plug. Daniel has a lot of great guests on there. I've been a guest on there myself, and it's a really great source of knowledge. So I highly recommend that. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on. We both better go. We've both got clients, but it's been a heap of fun and really, really educational. I hope a lot of the physios, the new grads, and the first year physio students, first year physios and first year EPs that are sort of starting out their journey, you'll get a lot out of this. So thank you very much.
Mate, it's been a pleasure. And I also encourage any new grads listening. Social media is the biggest value is connections.
Agreed.
So please feel free to reach out. I think that's a big one. don't be a stranger or just a lurker. When you get actively involved and engaged in the content, I think that's where the learning happens. So you can't just learn off a few infographics, actually engage and reach out to people that you look up to. So I would highly encourage that.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And you and I met each other through social media, I'm pretty sure. So it's a very, very good tool if it's used correctly. Now, Daniel, just for the listeners, where can they find you? Website, Instagram, all that sort of jazz?
Yep. Just look up Arbilla Exercise Physiology, or right now Barbell Psychology. So we're on Instagram and Facebook would be the main ones, and YouTube as well. So yeah, keen to keep the conversations going. And if anyone has questions, please do reach out.
Can you just repeat the first section of what you just said, your Instagram and stuff? It just cut out.
Yep.
Arbilla.
So Arbilla Exercise Physiology.
Yep.
We can see some funky looking oblique Jefferson curls.
Good stuff, mate. I love what you're preaching. It's great to chat to like-minded people. This podcast is live on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Any final thoughts, Daniel?
There's more than one way to lift.
Yeah.
Explore it. Try a few things.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many ways you can swing a golf club. There's so many ways you can hit a tennis ball. There's so many ways you can lift. There are plenty of ways to do it. Everyone's body's slightly different, so you can tweak it up and exactly, as you said, have a bit of a practice, see how it goes. Now, Daniel, let's do it again soon. 2021, I'd love to get you back on. We'll have to do a round table maybe at mine. Have a great Christmas and we'll chat in the new year.
Thanks, mate. Looking forward to it.
My pleasure. As usual, guys, stay strong.